The question everybody wants answers to, does size matter? Well, I guess that depends on the body of water you're fishing in. I've already showed you how to make full-size bladed jigs, so now it's time to show you how to make these little micro guys. Ah, yes, the great debate. So there are people who will go out and they only throw giant swim baits, 6, 8, 10, 12-inch swim baits, and they just like to power fish. However, there are times where you might find yourself needing to downsize. So an example would be, I have this little local pond in our neighborhood. There was a big fish kill off like a year and a half or so ago, and it's overstocked now, so a lot of the fish are just stunted. They're not going to get very big. The biggest fish in that pond is probably 2.5 to 3 pounds. Other examples would be small streams and creeks and rivers where you're fishing for a lot of smallmouth and just smaller fish in general. Well, if you're throwing a full-size bladed jig or even just a bigger bait in general, you may struggle to get bites. That is where these little micro bladed jigs really come in handy. They're a super compact profile. They are very, very small. You can catch everything from bluegill, panfish, crappie, bass, pretty much anything that'll get their mouth around it. This is a tiny little number one hook, and it's just a really cool little profile. So let's get over here and I'll show you everything that you need to make these little baits. So the mold you're going to need is this poison tail jig. This is the smaller of the two options. It's the one that has 1/8, quarter, and 3/8 ounce sizes. As you can see here, we are going to be using the 1/8 ounce size, and I have the tape and all this in place. I will explain that here in a minute. You are also going to need these tiny WEY 375 wire forms. You're going to need your hook of choice. This is a size 1 VMC 9255. The NI just stands for nickel coated, but these are just tiny size 1 hooks. These are actually the hooks meant for the crappie spinnerbait mold, but I have found them to work fantastic for this. You are going to need a small snap to go onto your blade. These are the size double lot from VMC, just the dual lock snaps. I like these a lot because, as you can see, they are still rated for up to 20 pounds. Small snaps like this are really hard to find in a very durable wire. A lot of the small ones that I've tried break really easily. These are phenomenal for being this small, extremely strong. And then last but not least, you're going to need your blade of choice. So these are from a company called Count Bass. I don't remember where I got these, but I'll leave them linked down below. It was one of the AliExpress or one of those websites where they usually ship straight from China. But the reason I like these, so if you see the holes where your snap connects are a little bit elongated, which makes getting that snap in place super simple. Some of the really small blades you're going to find are going to have really tiny holes, and it's hard to get your snap in place, but these are a really good option. So just like when making the larger sizes, you're going to take your wire form and hook it in the hook eye. But as you can see, the bend of this wire form makes that hook eye just slide out really easy. Once you pour your lead, you're probably fine. However, getting this in the mold can be a pain. So what I do, I take just a little tiny pair of cheap split ring pliers. I will grab the end of that wire form and I'll just bend it on my workbench. And then what you'll see is it bends that little wire just a little bit more, so that when you take your hook and you actually hook it, it actually stays attached a lot better. Like I said, I don't know if this step is necessary before pouring the lead, but it will make laying this in the mold a lot easier. And here's just a quick visual reference. You can see the top one is prior to bending, the bottom one is after bending. You can see how we have much more of a hook for that hook eye to grab onto. Now let's lay it in the mold. So this is what it looks like when you lay it in the mold. Now this brass pin over here, this is the same 5/64 inch brass pin that we use in our micro jigs. Now I just have that taped in place to prevent the lead from spilling out because I don't need a weed guard. I just tape this in place so I don't have to worry about putting it in every time. This 3M tape down here, I have it placed on both sides of the mold. That is just because this tiny crappie spinner hook is smaller than the gap between the molds, so that hook has a little bit of wiggle room. So I put this 3M tape on both sides that will keep that hook nice and straight when we close our mold. As you can see, we have our bent wire form holding that hook nice and strong. You have your open end of the wire form laying up where your hook eye would go. Now you're ready to close your mold and pour some lead. And this is what you're looking like after you pour your lead. You got that little tiny nub right there. You can just knock it down with a file, cut your sprue off. You can see that wire form will fill in with lead a little bit, so you just have to clean that out. I typically just take an X-Acto knife and cut right down. That lead will pop out, and then you're ready to powder coat. This is what we're looking at once we get it all cleaned up. You can see we got all that excess lead trimmed off, sanded down. I opened that wire form just a little bit because after we powder coat, that's where we're going to slide our blade down to connect. Now let's powder coat some of these up. And then one last thing I do before I bake these, so you can see we have all that powder coat on that wire form. I'm going to take just these little snips, and I'm not squeezing hard. I'm just putting a little bit of pressure, rotate it, and what that's going to do is chip all of that powder coat off of that wire form. But I'll go through, clean all that off, and I'll get all those little extra chunks here in just a second. But yeah, I just chip all of that powder coat off of the wire form prior to baking it. That way, once we attach our blade, there's no powder coat impeding the action of the blade. So we've got those out of the oven. You can see we just threw on some 3mm eyeballs on those. Now we're going to take our blade and our little snap. I open up that snap. I'm going to go in that hole in the middle, come out the one on top. I know this is kind of hard to see just because how small this is. You'll clip your snap back on, and there you have your snap on your blade. From there, you'll take your blade, you'll slide it onto that little jig head. You'll take your little pliers or whatever you got. You're going to bend that wire back shut. And there you have the completed little jig head. You can see that wire form is closed. That blade is not going to come off. You have everything attached just like you want. And now we're going to tie on our skirt. Now, one thing I do want to touch on, so the skirt material we're using for this is fine cut skirt material. The strands are a lot thinner than your normal strands. I feel like that is critical when using these little tiny jig heads. It just fits the profile a little bit better. Just personal preference, but I highly recommend fine cut skirt material. We're going to keep these skirt patterns pretty simple. So for this white one on the shad pattern, we're just going to take one full tab of just this pearl white skirt material. We're going to put a full tab on the bottom half of the jig head. Then on the top, we're going to take this other pattern. It's called bait fish. It's kind of just a black and almost like a smoky scale pattern with some green flake in it. And we're just going to put one tab of that across the top. And then for our green pumpkin jig head, we are just going to take one full tab of just green pumpkin with black flake. And we're going to evenly spread that all the way across the entire jig head. And then we're going to take a tab of watermelon with blue highlight. And then we're going to evenly spread that around the jig head as well. That is giving us 2 full tabs of skirt material on each jig head. And just like that, you now have your completed little micro jig. Just trim your skirt to whatever your desired length is. And these are fantastic little options. So you can see on the first one with the shad pattern, we kept it pretty simple. We just threw that blade on there. On the green pumpkin one, I actually powder coated the blade green pumpkin. Just like with everything, you can get as creative as you want. I've made some that are black and blue. I've made some kind of like a fire crawl pattern. I use a lot of just the green pumpkin and then just a basic shad pattern. But just like with everything else, you can get as creative as you would like. And as far as trailers for these little things, you can kind of use whatever your favorite little like crappie jig or soft plastic on the back of these. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll actually just take those 4.4-inch danglers that we make, cut just the tip of the tail off, thread it on just like a normal trailer, and you have a dynamite little bait in this super tiny little micro size package. So hopefully you guys liked that video and enjoyed the content. If you did, hit that like button for us, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you on the next one.